Good morning, everybody. The time is 9:30 and the inquiry is resumed. Thank you. Okay, just a few matters of housekeeping to go through first. Firstly, just to check the other parties, yesterday I had one further document, which was the Save Princess Parade witness list, and nothing else to add. Just to confirm that, thank you. On the site visit, I have this draft walking route that you've produced. It occurred to me yesterday, listening to some of the evidence, that perhaps it might also be beneficial to have a driving route. Agreed. The most obvious thing being, of course, Princess Parade itself, and then Seabrook Road. But perhaps that's something which during the day you can perhaps just give some thought to. Because I don't have a car with me now, but I will do next week, and also I'll be able to drive the relevant routes. And looking at the timetable, it does look likely that's going to be the afternoon of Wednesday in 2 weeks' time. And I'm happy to have that as accompanied if you both have witnesses to accompany me. So I just leave that to work on in the background, perhaps, and we can perhaps agree a final route at the end of the day.
Work on that.
And then there's order of business today. So we, in general, the idea is that we hear from Save Princess Parade, your final witness, and I also understand now that Christine Farrell.
Yes, Mr. Farrell, a point that's arisen in relation to that. Would you like me to deal with that?
Yes, please.
Yes. So, sir, the position is this, that, as you know, of course, perhaps to some extent for the benefit of other people, Save Princess Parade is a main party to the appeal, which involves producing written evidence and that evidence being given, and oral evidence being given, and the cross-examination of that evidence to test it, amongst other consequences of being a main party to an appeal. In Miss Farrell's proof of evidence, she does explain, so it's in the public domain, that she was discharged on medical grounds from the military service in 1999 and does have physical and mental disabilities, regrettably. And so I formed the view, speaking with Ms. Farrell yesterday, that she in fact is a vulnerable witness, and it would not be, in my view, fair to expose a vulnerable witness to the rigour and stresses and strains that necessarily accompany giving oral evidence and having that evidence tested in cross-examination. I appreciate there's a fairness point that goes into the balance, in the sense that that then deprives the applicant of the ability to cross-examine that witness and put the opposing case to her. But it seems to me, sir, that the fairest way to deal with this and to ensure procedural propriety is for me to invite you, sir, and this is something that I raised with Mr. Honey yesterday and with the programme officer. My proposal is this, that Miss Farrell simply reads her written evidence, proof of evidence. There is a redacted, adjusted version, in the same way that other Save Princess Parade witnesses have had to, as it were, trim their evidence in relation to matters which were outside the scope of the jurisdiction of the Secretary of State. And if Miss Farrell just simply reads her statement as adjusted, and that then is her evidence as it stands. And as I say, I appreciate there's a issue in the counterbalance, in the sense that that then deprives the applicant of the opportunity opportunity to cross-examine, but it seemed to me that that's a lesser matter in the overall scheme of the balance of procedural procedural matters and natural justice. And so that's the course that I was proposing to adopt for those reasons, which I hope find favour with yourself.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it seems like a reasonable course of action to me, when considering the round, but I will turn to Mr. Honey as well.
Of course.
Thank you, sir. I raised 3 points with Mr. Moyes last night, which he was kind enough to confirm, which is that we will be able to make, in closing submissions, comment on the weight to be given to the evidence because of that, and also comment on the content of the proof in closing submissions, without, as it were, having had the opportunity to put it to the witness. But also, sir, you'll recall, thirdly, there were a couple of topics that I'd reserved to deal with Chris Farrell on, as a result of which I won't be able to cross-examine on those. And Mr. Moyes has confirmed that he won't, in closing, take a point on those in terms of me not having put those points to the witness because they were being reserved for Chris Farrell. So, sir, with those 3 assurances from Mr. Moyes, I'm content that you follow the course of action, sir, that you've just indicated.
Okay, thank you. In that case, it's agreed that Chris Farrell will simply present her statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, was that out of the batting order? I was going to call her forward. Have I? Sorry.
Yes, I was actually going to come on to order.
Oh, sorry. Beg pardon.
So we have 2 interested parties who wish to speak this morning, who are Mark Brophy and Matthew Jones, I believe. And also, I think we now would add Chris Farrell to that. And I'm actually happy for her to go first, if that's helpful. But before we go on to that, we have had a number of requests for new evidence to be provided by interested parties. So I would like to understand a bit more about that, please, starting with, if they're here, Councillor Love.
Yes, please. I've requested, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, thank you.
I've requested that local transport note 7, published by the Department for Transport, should be added, as I should like to refer to that note to explain displacement of traffic as a result of the introduction of traffic calming measures. There are some figures within that local transport note which I believe to be relevant and helpful. So,
Okay, may I ask why was this not referred to in your original evidence?
because the information only became available after the 5th of October, following my pursuit of the matter with Kent County Council's Highways Director.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Honey, what's your position on this?
Yes, well, just on that last point, I mean, the document is years old, so it's certainly not just been published after the 5th of October this year. It was available earlier. So the position, of course, is you'll recall that when I called Mr. Fitch, I asked him to comment on Councillor Love's evidence as it then stood. If the document is admitted now, we will have been deprived of the opportunity of Mr. Fitch commenting on that, and in my submission that would be unfair. So my starting point, sir, is it should not happen because there was no reason why it could not have been referred to in the statement of the 5th of October. So if you are minded, contrary to that, to admit it, then there will be the fairness point to deal with. Mr. Fitch is here, I could recall him, but we've got limited inquiry time today. So what I would propose, as it were, to overcome the unfairness, if contrary to my primary submission, you are minded to admit it, is that Mr. Fitch be allowed to prepare a note to submit to the inquiry next week to respond to the additional point that is made. And it seems to me that if it is to be allowed, then that's the, well, both necessary, but the most efficient way of ensuring that the unfairness is overcome.
Okay, I want to avoid a kind of iterative process during the course of the inquiry in terms of keeping on adding different information. So I have to say, Councillor Love, my inclination is to not allow the extra information for that fairness procedural reasons that have just been outlined by Mr Honey, and because it would start off this process in order to draw it back into being fair to both sides. And we do try to avoid new evidence being added during the course of the inquiry. You would, of course, have the opportunity during your giving of evidence to give your verbal opinion on displacement of traffic. So you still will have a chance to make your opinion known when you're at the witness stand, but I'm afraid I won't accept the new document. But thank you very much. And then, Mark Brophy, I understand you wish to submit a revised statement. Can I understand a bit more about that, please?
Yes, that's correct. I amended the second part because some of the issues have already been discussed. Obviously, it's a live inquiry. I haven't been party to it. It's been going on this week due to work commitments. But if you'll allow it, I'd like to present the first part as was written and submitted. And the second part has been mentioned by you'll at least listen to my feelings.
So is this adding new information?
No. It's just referring, in actual fact, it's referring to Mr. Hunt's opening statement.
I think in this case, we can probably deal with this without actually having a revised statement, and you can purely deal with it when you're at the witness stand and highlight the elements you think are relevant, and then verbally update us on your opinion based on what you've heard earlier on in the inquiry.
Yeah.
Would you be comfortable with that? Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Martin, again, I think potentially extra information. Sorry, Councillor. Yes, so just understand a bit more about what this extra information is, please.
Well, similarly to Mr. Brophy, I have been attending and I realise that a lot of what my proof of evidence says has been already discussed. So I had taken out the inquiry clumps of information that have already been discussed.
Okay, so again, I think the way to deal with that is probably similar to how Safe Princess Parade's main witnesses have done it, which is when you come up, you can simply verbally state what your new position is, and we can all then mark that up, if that's okay with you. Thank you very much.
So can I just, in response to that, as I understand it, Mark Brophy and Councillor Martin have both indicated that they're not willing to be cross-examined now. So in relation to both of those, and indeed in relation to anything Councillor Love says, I will be commenting on those in closing submissions.
Yes.
I just wanted to make that clear, as it were, for the inquiry, that especially for Mr Brophy and Councillor Martin, where I won't be cross-examining, I'll have to deal with that in closing submissions.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that, thank you. Yes, Mr Brophy?
Just wanted to say it's never my intention to leave it examined. That hasn't changed.
Okay, thank you. And that's absolutely, of course, you're right. Thank you. And then Dr Burrell, though he's not here, is he? Because he's appearing virtually.
I don't know if we can switch over and get him into the...
Perhaps we deal with him as he appears rather than doing it in that way, in an iterative way.